If I could go back 10 years, there's one thing I would tell myself. You're listening to the wrong voice. For decades, I thought God spoke in warnings, in disappointments, in expectations that I could never meet, and that voice shaped my entire life. But then everything changed. I discovered a truth that completely rewired my relationship with God, a truth that's been hidden in plain sight. So today, I want to share 3 transformational insights that will help you to break the barriers from hearing God's true voice in your life. The first insight is the transactional nature of society and religion. 2 is the hidden power of fear. And 3, we'll talk about Jesus' true voice. But before we dive into these points, I have a thought experiment for you. Let's pretend that Jesus Christ knocked on your door right now. How would you feel? Would you rush to open it with joy? Would you hesitate? Would you instinctively hide, feeling unworthy of his presence? Or would you bow in reverence, afraid to meet his gaze? Each of these responses reveals something deeper, an unconscious belief of who you think God is and what he thinks of you. And these beliefs shape everything. I know this because I've been there. I grew up in a world where I felt love was earned, where faithfulness was measured by my ability to keep all the commandments. I thought every mistake pushed God further away, that my failures created distance, and that my struggles made me a disappointment. But when I truly understood the insights I'm going to share with you, everything changed. So let's dive into part 1, the transactional nature of society and religion. So whenever we have a culture or a religion that prioritizes and focuses on correct behavior, what you'll always get is transactional love. We do the right behavior and we get praise and blessings. We do the wrong behavior and we get disappointment and punishment. Now, let me give you an example. When I was younger, I encountered pornography. And even though my exposure was minimal, the message I got from the world and from church leaders was unmistakable. Pornography is poisonous and filthy. This kind of language demonized the behavior. It labeled the action itself as evil. Now you might be thinking to yourself, yeah, Tyson, it is evil. And even though I agree that pornography is harmful, we forget that our brains automatically link action with identity. We believe that what we do is who we are. So if I fix cars, then I am an auto mechanic. If I like soccer, then I am a soccer player. So if I engage in a behavior that has been labeled poisonous and filthy, then what does that mean about me? It means that I am filthy. And does God allow for filthiness? Nope. Or at least that's what I was taught. I learned from teachers that God cannot look upon sin with the least degree of allowance, that all who sin fall short of the glory of God. So with this backdrop, what did this do concerning my image of who God is? I'll tell you, it turned it into condemnation and judgment. It turned every action or behavior that I was shamed for or taught as wrong and turned it into something that disconnected me from God and ruined my relationship with him. Now, what this means on a broader scale is that any action that you have done that is labeled wrong or even unwanted will most certainly create an unconscious belief that if you engage in such practices, God will see you as lesser, or your worth in God's eyes and his love for you will be lessened. I mean, when I was 9 years old, my mom made this offhanded comment to a friend she was talking to. She said, "Oh, Tyson doesn't like girls." But the thing is, I did like girls. And if my mom said that I didn't, then it means I shouldn't like girls. And if I do, then that must mean something is wrong with me because I do like girls. And my little brain knows that if I keep going down this path of doing what my parents don't want me to do or think I shouldn't do, then it will lead to punishment and disappointment. Why? Because that's what I've always experienced. When I don't do what my parents say, I am met with disapproval. When I do what they say, they meet me with praise and the love that I yearn for. And here's where we come to the truth that has been hidden in plain sight. And when I say this, you're going to think, Tyson, yeah, I know this. But the truth is, you haven't. Because if you truly knew what I'm about to tell you, then your life would be completely different. Here's the truth. God loves you no matter what you do or don't do. How do we know this? All we have to do is look at the life of Jesus Christ. Of all the times that the disciples failed, did Christ ever say, "Oh, sorry, pal, you're out of the kingdom"? No, he didn't. Instead, he forgave them every time. Did Jesus shame the disciples when, after spending years walking with him, watching his miracles, witnessing his resurrection, and having been given a charge to go and spread the gospel to the world, did he shame them for going and fishing? No. Instead, he helped them to catch more fish, cooked them some fish, and then said, "Hey, do you love me? How about you go and feed my sheep? I'm not here to shame you. I'm here to restore you to the truth of who you really are, Peter. You are not a fisher of fish. You are a fisher of men and a feeder of my sheep." And because Jesus only did what the Father would do, we know that God would communicate in the same way. God's love doesn't diminish when we struggle. God moves closer to us when we make mistakes, not further away. And once we truly understand this, we can begin to see a transformation. Let's go on to part 2, the hidden power of fear. Now, the transactional mindset naturally comes from fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of failure, fear of rejection, all the fears. Because these fears cause us to try and take control over our lives. When we fear, we abandon trust in the unknown and the unseen, and instead only focus on what we do know and what we can rely upon. Let me say that again. When you fear, you stop trusting God and what He has told you that you cannot see, and you focus only on what you have experienced in your past and what you know to be certain. It's kind of like Indiana Jones crossing the invisible bridge. The book he held told him that a bridge was there, but his eyes couldn't see it. And he had a choice. He could trust the book or he could trust the flesh. You see, when you are fearful, your brain literally focuses on doing what's familiar because it associates familiarity with safety, even if it's not safe. Just look at all the people who stay in abusive relationships. They only do so because it's familiar. Now, if we take the scriptures and we reference all the times God says, "Fear not," we'll likely approach fear from a place of, "I can't fear. God tells me I shouldn't fear. If I do fear, then there's something wrong with me." And then we get back to this idea of perceived wrongness in the sight of God, and it disconnects us. But what if fear was okay? What if we could use fears as signposts to help us understand our false beliefs about God? This is where we discover the hidden power of fear. You see, every fear that we have has a hidden message concerning what we believe about God. For example, if we have fear in our finances, then we unknowingly believe that God can't or won't provide for us. If we have fear over our health and our prayers go unanswered, we might start to believe that God doesn't care, or worse, that He is frustrated with our perceived lack of trust. That if I only had more faith, then I would be healed. And when it seems like our relationships aren't improving, we might believe that God is withholding His support, or that He doesn't have the power to turn things around and make things new. And all these beliefs go on under the radar because we're not supposed to be angry at God. or frustrated about him not showing up in the way we'd like him to. I think we've been taught for so long that God loves us that our brains won't even allow for us to be frustrated over all the unanswered prayers. And the problem with this is that all progress stops when you live in a lie. And the opposite is true. All progress starts when you tell the truth. God actually wants us to talk to him and express our frustrations. Just ask David, who wrote the words, "God, why have you forsaken me? And how long will you hide your face from me?" God can only teach us the truth of who he really is if we share how we really feel. You might wonder, why are so many churches not thriving? It's because I have to show up to church with rose-colored glasses and a polished suit. Because if I believe anything different, if I admit how hard life is, how frustrated I am at God, or how abandoned I feel, or how hard it is to try and be perfect at everything that leadership is telling me to do, then I'll be judged by the people. I might be outcasted. And since our brains are wired for relationship, we keep on the fake charade so that we can still belong to the group. We are afraid to break the norm. And this fear is an indication that I don't really believe that God is for me and that he loves me and will sustain me even if I go against the norm. Now, I want to show you a framework that will explain this fear in another way. Let's start with circumstance, which could be a financial crisis, a health challenge, a relational problem. And in this circumstance, you have the thought, God must not be providing for me, or maybe he doesn't care. Now, most likely, if you have a thought like this, it's going to create a feeling of anxiety, fear, disconnection, abandonment. And when we have these kinds of feelings, the actions that those feelings drive are things like over focusing on how to fix everything on our own. We might shut down and withdraw entirely, or we just don't do anything. And these reactions correlate with the fight, flight, and freeze response of the brain. If we engage in those kinds of actions, the natural outcome and result of that is that things get worse. And we unknowingly will blame God or other people or ourselves. And this blaming keeps everything external instead of connecting with God internally. Life just becomes harder. And then our brain looks at this whole experience and says, see, God's not in this. He's not helping you. Look how horrible your life is. It's kind of like the prodigal son. When coming back home after spending all of his inheritance, he thought himself unworthy of belonging to the family. He likely assumed his father would be upset and possibly not even accept him. But the father didn't show up that way. Instead of withdrawing, the father ran to him, restoring his clothes and his identity as a son, and welcomed him back into the family with celebration. Now, if we live in scarcity, insecurity, or inadequacy, we're going to assume that God doesn't want to accept us or think that he distances himself from us, rather than seeing him as a loving father who is cheering us on, always beside us, and delighting in any goodness that we can muster. All I know is that the moment we replace fear with trust, it opens the door to a whole new level of relationship. And this is a lot easier said than done, which is why I have been gifted and why God has put me on a mission to help people strengthen their relationship with God by helping them to better hear him and trust in what he says. So if you really want to work on this and you see this as a key to your transformation and living out your purpose, then I invite you to join the free community. There's going to be a link in the description so that we can start getting to know one another and I can start supporting you. And also, you can meet all the other people that want to be this way too. Now, let's move on to part 3, Jesus' true voice. Now, because fear distorts our perception of God, we have to look to the life of Jesus Christ and how he spoke to people so that a different image of God can emerge. Let's take a moment to look at Peter's story. Jesus said to Peter, "Get thee hence, Satan," which sounds kind of harsh, right? But was it shaming? No. Jesus wasn't attacking Peter's worth. He was correcting his thinking. And that's what he did with the disciples a lot. It was all about correcting the way we think about one another. Later, Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And how did Jesus respond? Did he look at him with disappointment? No. He looked at Peter with love and restored him to the truth of who he really was as a fisher of men and a feeder of sheep. But here's the problem. When we fail, we often assume that God looks at us differently. Why? Because we're projecting our past experiences of life and relationships on him. Our relationships with our conditionally loving caregivers are mirrored onto God and reinforced by a society that believes we need to do things and create things in order to be valued. Now, if you'd like me to create a video that dives deeper into that parental relationship and the wounds there and how to heal those so that you can receive more of God's love, then let me know in the comments below. Remember that thought experiment that I talked about earlier? That if Jesus Christ showed up at your door and you were to bow down in reverence to him, and how that could actually indicate a false view of God? Let me explain this. The thing about Jesus Christ is that he was fully God and fully human too. He called his disciples friends. He sat and ate with sinners. He went to the bathroom just like the rest of us. You see, if we take the humanity out of Christ, then he becomes too high for us to connect with him. If I respect him too much, it actually creates distance in our relationship. I remember learning that one of the highest ranking characteristics of successful managers in a unionized workforce is this: approachability. Think about that for a moment. If Christ is not approachable, then why would I ever want to connect with him? Why would I want to grow closer to someone that's going to judge or condemn me or think negatively about me? I wouldn't. You see, fear changes the way that we see God, and it literally changes the tone of his voice when we read the book, just like the negative tone we might assume when we read an email from our boss. So if your image of Jesus makes you want to run and hide instead of run and open the door with joy, then I'd say the version of his voice you're hearing isn't actually his. If his voice doesn't come with love, it's not him. Now, this doesn't mean that he won't chastise us sometimes. It just means that we will never feel a sense of shame with the chastisement. You'll feel convicted and committed to change instead of condemned and condoned. At least this has been my experience. God has at times chastised me, and I never felt shame. I just felt a desire and a knowing that I needed to change. So let's recap. In this video, we covered 1, how our society and religion have created a transactional view of love. And if we hold on to this view, we will naturally disconnect from God's loving voice. Number 2, we've talked about how fears reveal our hidden beliefs about God's nature and character that are stopping us from connecting deeper with him. So if you pay attention to your fears, they will reveal where you are lacking trust. And 3, we've learned that Jesus' voice is always calling us into connection, not condemnation. So if this message resonated with you, then I want to invite you to join the community called the Receive Academy. It's free. And if you join now, I have this course I created called The 7 Laws of Listening, which will help you understand the mechanics of how to hear God always. And my intention is to keep that course free, but I have thought about charging for it because it is that good. So if you want to get in now, then I just encourage you, go down in the description below, click on the link. And when you're ready to learn about how to create unshakable trust, you might want to watch this other video I created.